Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the March zoning board that was recessed from last week due to the storm. A couple of housekeeping things before we start. We only have a 3-member board until 7:15, then we'll have a 4-member board. So here's how it works. You need to have 3 votes in the affirmative to have a case heard and passed. You're entitled to that. So if there's anybody here who wants to have their case heard before a 4 or 5-member board, you're entitled to that, and we can recess it till the next month.
Maria Dolder, on behalf of Irving Oil Corporation, they would like to have it before a full board, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next month.
Thank you. Right, so you'll open the hearing and then recess it till next month.
All right. And then, is there anybody else who would like to be heard by a 5-member board?
Can we wait on, you guys are just going to listen, it's not a hearing, but Laura Scott wanted to be here.
Yeah, what I'm going to do is probably wait till Laura Scott. I just want to do the preliminaries right now. And
So that's still okay. I didn't want you to postpone.
yeah, so you want to be heard tonight?
Yes.
And you are?
Mary Gill.
That's case 0118?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll do that. And Irving Oil Marketing, case 1118 is going to be recessed until next month.
Yeah, just open the hearing and then make a motion to recess.
Was there any other cases? I thought you mentioned there might be another case.
Yeah, well, Concord Litho sent a letter requesting the
So
same
anybody
thing.
who's here for Concord Litho, case number 1218, that also, there's a request to be recessed. Yes, sir.
Nami, New Hampshire will be heard tonight.
Okay, thank you. How about 117 Manchester Street, case 1318?
Will be heard tonight too, but I'd prefer to have more.
By all means. And finally, how about case 1418, Dan DiPiero?
Yes.
Also a 4-member board is good? Okay.
Yeah, tonight will be okay.
Okay. So let me briefly tell you what our requirements are, and then we'll just...
Is Concord Litho getting pushed out?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right, so let me just do the procedure things, and then maybe we'll just take a break until Laura shows up. If that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, so listen, the chair will call the hearing to order at 7:15 then, or I guess I've already called it to order. And what we'll do is we'll hear variances and special exceptions, although we do have a request for a rehearing that we'll hear first. We call the cases individually in order listed on the agenda. I'll ask the applicant to step forward and to be sworn in. We'd like you to limit your testimony, if possible, to 15 minutes. And then I'll ask for anyone wishing to appear in favor of the appeal to testify, and then anyone in opposition to the appeal will then be asked to testify. I'll call on the code administrator for any additional facts, and if additional facts are presented, then the applicant will have a chance to rebut any new issues. Each hearing is then closed upon completion of the hearing, and the board will deliberate and act on each appeal. So let's take a break until we have Laura here.
Well, you could actually open the other 2 cases and recess them if you wanted to.
All right, let's do that. First case before us then is case 1118 Irving Oil Marketing. Applicant wishes to reestablish and expand a retail store and a retail fuel station and requests 4 variances for a property located 163 North State Street in the CU Urban Commercial District and 22 and 24 Pennacook Street in the UT Urban Transitional District.
Move to recess based on applicant's request for a full panel.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? To recess? Aye. Okay. The next case is case 1218 Concord Litho Group wishes to reconstruct the parking area for a printing and warehouse facility at 92 Old Turnpike Road in an IN industrial district.
I'll move that we recess because the applicant requested a full board.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. That takes care of housekeeping. So the first case we have tonight is a request for a rehearing, case 0118, Dustin Schuneman for Granite Arrow Properties. Mary Deal request for rehearing. Applicant requests a special exception under Article 28.2.4K, the Table of Principal Uses, and in accordance with Article 28.7.17, to permit the parking of one commercial vehicle, accessory use A-10, used by a resident in conjunction with an off-site occupation for property located at 87 Rumford Street in an RN residential neighborhood district. I think we heard this, in December?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And Mary Deal has requested us to reconsider it, and I think everybody got packets in the mail. And has everyone had a chance to review the information that they received?
Yes.
Yes.
What say you on the request?
Mr. Chair, I don't know how, because I haven't sat in on any of your rehearing requests, so I don't know what the procedure you usually use, but the ones I've seen in the past, the board goes through the paperwork submitted, sees if there's anything that warrants if there was a procedural error or new information, and then decides whether a request should be, a rehearing should be granted. And even if there was a procedural error, or even if there was new information, if it's not gonna, if the board doesn't think it may change the outcome, you don't have to grant a rehearing. And I don't know if you mentioned this, again, I apologize for being late, I had a work commitment, but that, I didn't know if it was mentioned that this is not it's a public meeting, because it's public, but that no testimony is taken at the meeting. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that the public knew that.
Craig,
So,
Craig
okay.
can add or confirm what Lauren.
Yes, yeah, no, Laura's correct.
Okay.
Well, no, but if we do rehear it, then testimony.
But that's a whole other we have to
separate
post
hearing.
it as a hearing.
Correct. If you
and
grant the
notice.
rehearing, yes, it goes out and it's reposted and then it's treated as a brand-new hearing.
So we wouldn't hear it today?
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
I do have some comments, but I'll let other people
Go ahead.
if they want.
Yeah.
Okay. And I do appreciate Mrs. Deal's putting the packet together, so thank you for that. You see that there was a lot of effort put into this. I did go through and I have comments on your points because I do want to address them. And then again, it is up to the board whether it's going to be reheard. Or if it should be reheard. And then just again looking, and I refuse to get bifocals, so I'm doing the glasses on and off thing. So looking at the paperwork, the point about that there's a zoning violation or a potential one about, and I'm just going through your letter, Mrs. Deal, number 1, about that there's a violation. That is not, in my opinion, a reason to grant a rehearing. That's a code enforcement issue. If parking is happening in violation of the zoning ordinance or with this board approved with the special exception, that is code enforcement, that someone is not following the rules. I don't believe that's a reason to grant a rehearing. Looking at number 2, about the purpose of the zoning ordinances, and again, G, which is what so this is still on that first page, G that you italicized. I do feel that was presented by yourself, that you felt that wasn't being met. I feel that was presented to the board that night and considered by the board. It may not have been to your satisfaction, obviously, based on your letter, but I do believe that was brought up. Number 3, and this I will put aside for further board discussion of whether or not the applicant provided misleading information. And so I'm going to leave number 3 for maybe further discussion. And then, yes, and again, the number 4, again, if it's in violation of where the applicant proposed in the material and at the meeting where the van would be parked is different than what he is doing, that again is a violation of the approval we granted. So again, we approved it, if I'm not mistaken, that he would be parking at a specific location with his vehicle. If that's not what's happening, that's a violation of him not following the approval. Not, and again, I don't believe that that is a reason that we can grant a rehearing just because he's not following what we said he could be allowed to do, and that's the same thing with the zoning violation. Again, I'm not passing judgment of whether or not he is doing that, but what you're stating is happening. Number 5, about completed applications. I believe that that is a staff and administrative function of what staff takes in and deems to be complete in order to put it on the agenda. The zoning board is not involved in that. The zoning board can decide at the meeting if we don't feel we have enough information. We can deny an application, we can postpone it and ask for more material, but the board itself is not involved in the day-to-day operations of staff accepting material in, whether they date stamp stuff, whether they accept material after the initial date. That is truly an internal process that maybe could be explained at another time further to the zoning board so we understand it and make sure that our rules of procedure and our ordinance follows that. But again, we do not date stamp material. We don't do that. I can understand your concern about it, but that truly is a staff function as it currently stands. And again, if the board felt that more information was needed, we could have asked for it to be provided. We could have postponed the hearing once it was here. We could have continued it. But again, I don't believe that none of us asked for more information, I believe, at that meeting that wasn't provided by the applicant or staff with our questions. Again, number 6, and I will apologize for my misunderstanding of what happens after a decision is made by this board. I'm new to this board. I've been involved in other boards, not seated in this position, but actually seated in Mr. Walker's position. It was my error that not understanding how notices of decision or the follow-up happens after this. I had assumed that the findings of fact, because the board had discussed some of them, and my assumption is, and maybe the other board members, that when we either grant or when we grant a request, it's because they meet the criteria outlined in the ordinance. I had assumed that a notice of decision is provided stating as such that it meets this section, and I did not know that that didn't happen. So I apologize for that, and how that works. So I don't believe that the board, that's a double negative. I believe that the board took these items under number 6 into consideration during our discussion and during our voting. I'll speak for myself. I didn't realize that they were not provided in writing after the fact. So that's I will accept responsibility for not understanding that. And again, the issuance of the decision, that is something that the staff does on behalf of the zoning board. And again, from my previous involvement in zoning boards, separate notices of decision that I've been involved in have always been provided within 72 hours and made available to the public, and either approved or not. And again, not understanding, my fault for not understanding how it happened here, but I do know that information was provided to the applicant about the decision, and maybe that procedurally can be strengthened going forward. So thank you for bringing that up, at least to my attention. You did also mention the minutes. Minutes under statute, I believe, have to be available within 5 business days. They do not have to be posted on a website. They just have to be made available. So available can mean at the office. And again, procedurally, maybe that could be strengthened or clarified, but that is not something, I don't believe, that would be a criteria for a rehearing request. The board does not control when minutes are available, and nor does that factor into our decision-making during that meeting. But I do appreciate you bringing up those, for me, those procedural items that could be strengthened to make sure that the public has information in a timely manner and to help the board with decision-making going forward. Number 7, you talked about issues brought before the board by yourself and Mr. Mulholland. I do find the language odd, and I did look it up in the zoning ordinance, Article 28.9.3F4, that any presentations made to the ZBA and submitted shall be deemed a condition of any subsequent decision of the ZBA. I find the word condition, I understand how you're reading it, that it should be a condition of an approval. I don't know what the intent of that word was, but I don't believe in the drafting of the ordinance, because that would mean that anything that was ever presented by anybody at the meeting should be a condition of approval if something's granted by this board. And I can't imagine that was the intent when that ordinance was written. So perhaps code enforcement can look into that further, because I think, again, thank you for bringing that up. I do know that the items that were brought up, and again, I'll speak for myself, by you and Mr. Mulholland, were taken into consideration by myself. Again, I cannot speak for the whole board. I assume they did. And I will say I did question whether we should attach a condition to an approval. And the board did not seem receptive to that. But I know that that was mentioned by myself. The concern you raised about the abutters not having proper time getting the notification, it's prior, 10 business days prior to, I believe, business days, or is it calendar days?
Calendar days.
Calendar days, thank you. Within the hearing, and it was in the paper. It's always hard around the holidays. I totally understand that. But it is 10 days prior to the hearing that people have to be notified. And perhaps, again, something can be looked at of maybe expanding that out further, because 10 days is not a long time to get notice of something. So maybe that can be looked at in the future. The issue about the U-Haul truck is, again, a violation of zoning that should be looked at it's a current violation. That doesn't have anything, I don't believe, to do with our special exception being that was granted. And I don't look at, again, me personally, that if a special exception is granted for one case, that means any other case has to be granted. Every case is looked at independently under statute. It's looked at by the board. It's supposed to be looked at by the board as individual. Just because someone else had a variance or a special exception doesn't mean that the next person is going to get one. So that's just again my opinion. I will say that I do feel that the board should talk about whether the material presented by the applicant was accurate and truthful. I'm sure if it wasn't, I would think that would warrant a rehearing if information was provided to us that wasn't accurate. But that's me, and I know that was really long and long-winded, and thank you for your indulgence, and thank you for listening. And again, Mrs. Deal, thank you very much for putting all this together. It was very helpful. I think that's enough for me.
I appreciate the work and going through all that. I mean, I agree with most of what you just said. Though, a couple of questions. I mean, as far as what you said was a staff function. I think it was maybe number 5 on her 4 on her list. It's a little hard to.
If 4 was
6.
6. We're going 6.
Is that right?
6 was, again, my...
the requisite findings.
Yes, because it's that it should be, when it confirms in writing each of the following findings. And again, part of it is in a notice of, and again, from where I've always worked, a notice of decision is provided
Yeah.
saying that the zoning board, in this case, would have granted a special exception per the requirements outlined in section so-and-so, because that would mean it was in writing, the findings were in writing.
Yeah.
And perhaps we should have been more clear in going through each of the findings and discussing it at the meeting, because that would have helped staff put that into the minutes and put it in a notice of decision. But the in writing part isn't the board putting it in writing, it's the decision part being put in writing.
Yeah, I'm not too hung up on that, because that, a couple years ago when I saw that section and I asked about whether it had to be in writing, and it was explained to me at the time that just simply means it contained in the minutes. Whether that's good enough, I don't know, but that's been our long-standing practice, so that wasn't specific to this particular case at all. We never ourselves put that in writing. We don't have a mechanism to do that. But there's something she said, I'm trying to put my finger on, where she said that she had submitted a bunch of written materials in advance, and she assumed that they would be shown to us in advance like the applicants were, but they weren't, and instead we never saw those materials, and she was put on the spot, not being, having only a few minutes to speak and not really realizing she would be having to summarize all of her materials in orally, and she didn't feel prepared to do that, or that she was able to make all of her points, because she just assumed that we would have gone over her written materials in advance, which we didn't.
I believe she stated that at the meeting, yes.
So that procedurally, I can see her point about that, but on the other hand, obviously the applicant's going to present all their materials. They're the applicant. If we allowed all abutters to present a limited amount of written materials in advance, and we're expected to have reviewed all of that and comprehended it, that would, in extreme cases, it could be an impossible burden for us, just because it could be an unlimited amount of material that we'd be asked to review. But on the other hand, I do think in most cases we should get that stuff in advance, or the applicant should be told that we can't review that much material. They really need to be able to summarize it and be able to succinctly give it to us in a more brief fashion, so that we can fully understand what she's saying, because a lot of people really they're not used to public speaking, and they would either be more prepared or bring someone else who could advocate for them better.
I don't remember reading that in her paperwork for tonight's meeting. I know she stated at the meet, and again, I may have missed it. I apologize if I did. I know that Mrs. Deal stated that at that hearing, that she had provided material in advance, and was not happy that we didn't have it. And again, that may be something we figure out as a board with staff, of how we want that stuff handled if stuff gets provided in advance. But I don't know if that's a reason for rehearing it, because the board could have asked for a recess to read the material. I know that a couple of us sat there and sort of sifted through it while we were listening to other testimony. But we could have easily asked for a postponement or a 15-minute break to read through the material. And again, that may be something that the board and staff work out of, if stuff is submitted in advance, do we come pick it up? Or are we just alerted to it, so we maybe show up a little early before the meeting to make sure we read material? I know that again, having been on all sides of this, sitting staff and applicant, if someone takes the time to submit stuff in advance, I want to be able to read it in advance. I have a hard time multitasking, reading and doing something else, but I did do it at that meeting and look through things.
Because I've noticed that usually if there's letters submitted by someone other than the applicant, or materials, that Chris will kind of summarize them, and usually it's a one page, and he summarizes them pretty well. It's not an issue. But what's the policy if someone does submit like a larger volume of materials that they want us to read in advance?
Up until recently, no information was provided electronically or directly to the board prior to the meeting. It's only been very recently, with the advent of internet and such like that, that we scan them in and it's there for the public. The board has always had the opportunity, if they wish to review the files beforehand, to come into the office as anybody else and review the material. But it's not our obligation to supply other material to the board. Again, you're a quasi-judicial board. Argument is made that you are better off not necessarily reviewing stuff beforehand so that you get a fresh set of eyes on what is presented to you from both sides. So that has been the policy in the past. So the information provided online is there for the public for the most part. So, but we've never provided applications or anything else to the board beforehand.
I mean, I think that's a good policy in the sense that it could deter a volunteer board if we're expected to put hours into every case before each hearing. But at the same time, do you think that's made clear to, you know, in this case, Ms. Deal, when she submits this, that we really, the board members are not obligated to, and
I was not party to a conversation on that, so I don't know.
And again, that this may be a larger discussion with the board and staff of what we want, and maybe it's just, hey, let an email, there's material that's been submitted. See if you want to read it, go ahead, and if you don't, that's your choice. Because yeah, some people want to walk into it, to the presentation, and hear all sides, and some people want to research it and look into it. So, but that may be a bigger discussion, not specific to this case about material submitted, but and if it is going to be that, yeah, we're just gonna take it at the meeting, that's known to the public so that they're prepared for that as well. Or yes, we'll take everything and it'll be provided. Just again, so everyone's on the same page and people don't think that they are gonna just assume things. So we'll leave it at that. So,
So I was not in attendance at the meeting where this came up, but I reviewed the minutes, and I think I can probably decide what I want to do in this based upon what's in front of me. I did have a question, though. It's in two parts, and it gets to the issue of the conditions that you raised, Laura, that if it was presented by the applicant. So one of the points that Ms. Deal made was that the applicant represented that the size of the van was it was about the size of a normal pickup truck or slightly bigger. And so what I guess two observations on that. I'm wondering, I couldn't glean it from the minutes, what visual presentation of the van did the committee have, the board have at the meeting? And if in fact the applicant represented that the size of the vehicle was about the size of a pickup truck and it's not, is that a violation of a condition because it was part of the record?
I think the size of the pickup truck related to the length, and then
Right.
we had actual pictures of the vehicle parked in the lot, I believe. So
the height was larger,
Yeah.
right?
And
So
we're
the
able
board
to-
was aware of the height of the vehicle?
We had a sense of the height, I think, by looking at the pictures, because it was juxtaposition with fences and other things too.
But am I, as far as it being a condition, isn't it true that the representations the applicant makes are, and we don't have to explicitly make that a condition, that's presumed to be a condition of the variance?
right, what they presented, yes.
I mean, maybe not to a T, but at least materially.
That was the van that was going to be parked there. It wasn't.
It wasn't some, or a van like that.
Yeah, I often, as you probably observed, sometimes I'll suggest a condition on the approval, and I'm sometimes reminded by the chair that I don't necessarily need to do that because it was in the minutes and represented by the applicant. So sometimes we go as far as to put the condition on, and other times we remind the applicant that it's, was part of the minutes and their expectations.
I think, and I think what the rehearing request is that, because we knew what the van was because there were pictures presented. I think the misrepresentation that's being alleged, I think that's the right word, that sounds kind of strong, but that of it equating to other vehicles, because it wasn't really parked next to other similar type of vehicles. I believe that's what her question, or what she's alleging, that he equated it to, other, and I think I even may have said an extended cab pickup truck, that it seems to be the same size. And again, I wasn't thinking height, I was thinking more the length of it, not the height. And there were pictures that showed it next to fences, and I think a smaller car, but nothing else of, oh, here's the equivalent size that would be allowed by right to park there, because it's a personal vehicle.
So, but then, and then the other element of that is that she's saying he's parking it in a different place than what he represented to the board, so, or that's basically what you're saying. So is it true that if he's parking in a different place, in a materially different place than what he represented, that code enforcement could act on that, and that would not be within the confines of the variance, and he
Special exception.
the
Yeah.
special exception, or he could be cited, or, because you would then have to make a judgment call and like look at the minutes. How does that work?
Yeah, we'd have to review what was specifically said, and again, it is helpful if the board wants to set specific conditions, so that's, again, clear to the applicant and clear to us what those conditions are. Oftentimes, an applicant may make a statement that they could do something, but that's not necessarily committing themselves to doing it. So.
Well, when the applicant was here, we did ask where it was going to be parked, and he did show where he was parking that car, where he was going to park it.
And he did mention, he got into some details about how only it could be seen by such and such.
Right,
view
and
so
that was his
He
point.
did it intentionally to minimize the eyesore.
Right, and so, again, in my opinion, is if he's parking the vehicle, and again, it's totally code enforcement would have to follow up on this, but that's, if there's a violation of what was approved in a special exception or a variance, that's not a reason to rehear the case. That means that they're not following the rules that were put in place for them. Because
That's going to be really hard for.
But that's how it works. Because again,
It's not.
Well, I think in
it's
some
specific written. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I think in some measure what we're hearing from code enforcement is it sometimes is helpful if it's an important condition to us that we don't simply rely on the minutes,
Which is what you
in
were
that
saying.
we specifically, and so, one option could have been at the time to condition the approval on the physical location of where it would be parked so that it would.
Which was a suggestion you had.
yeah, I was
Laura
gonna
made,
do
right?
that, and I was talking, and yep. So.
So an option before us would be to grant a rehearing for the purpose of doing that.
Of
Except
where.
for if we grant the rehearing, I don't think we can say it's with a specific purpose, because at that point we.
No,
have-
I understand
yeah.
that, but one of the consequences could be more specific conditions on the approval.
You could, yeah, we could do that. If the board felt it was unclear, but then it's still a code enforcement issue if he doesn't park there. That doesn't,
Oh, I understand.
But it might be
Yeah,
more
yeah.
clear
I-
for
yeah,
code if,
right.
because even the minutes are never going to be perfect, so it means, when you get into a specific location, it means
Right.
code might have to come and listen to a record. I mean, I don't think they really can do all that realistically.
I can
Depending on the
understand.
situation.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
got tapes that go back 50
Right.
years, and I've pulled them out
Yeah.
to review the hearings, so.
It's got lost in there sometimes.
Again, personally, you don't want to rehear a case or grant a rehearing just to make it easier for code enforcement. If the board feels that we could have made it clearer of what we intended to approve.
I wasn't suggesting we do it to make it easier for
Okay.
code enforcement. I think we're doing it to make it.
that was answering more to
Oh,
him. Sorry, I was looking this way. I'll look
That's right.
this way.
Let's look at the minutes.
Because, and again, that may just be on the board of being clearer going forward of what we are approving and not making it assumed that we're all going to remember 5 years from now what someone pointed to on a map, and making it easier for everybody to remember, not just code enforcement, but the applicant and the butters and the board itself.
So actually, looking at the minutes, it says that Craig showed on the map exactly where the vehicle was being parked.
Mhm.
So,
So we have a tape version of that, so we can look at exactly where you
Yeah.
moved it to.
Okay.
and it also means that Craig's the one he'd be in charge of enforcing it. He obviously is well aware of where it's supposed to be parked, and if it's parked in a different place, then
Craig could win the lottery tomorrow and be out of here. So we always have to, do you have a ticket?
No, he'd be the guy who gets to the podium and says, I'm not quitting my job.
No.
Because again, it's just, if we feel that we could have been clearer, that's one thing. You don't want to always assume, and I assumed that, okay, that was part of the presentation, that's where you should be parking. But again, if someone isn't, that's not a reason for the zoning board, I don't feel, to grant a rehearing, because it's code enforcement. We'd be granting rehearings, unfortunately, all over the place. Sometimes people, a tree dies, they don't replant it, and that was part of the approval. A lot of it is enforcement, unfortunately, for staff.
So looking at, really focusing on the allegations of misleading information, it boils down to 1, the size of the van, and 2, where he's parking it. Where he's parking it, we've addressed. That's really an issue for enforcement. The size of the van, her complaint is not with its length, but with its height and bulk, but that was known to us. The height was known to us at the time. We talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, it's hard to say whether it was misleading, because we can't hear any new evidence, but as far, we did see the pictures, I don't think I don't have the pictures we saw at the time in front of me, but I don't think we'll really have any information that they're misleading. Oh, you have those, the pictures?
Craig, do you have the picture?
I have the pictures
From the original?
Yeah, well, this is from the original hearing too. Yeah, I got the whole folder here if anybody wants to look at the original application.
Oh, wait, you know what? I gave mine back because
Did you have pictures
they were
relative
her
to the
originals.
fence?
They were her originals.
Those were attached to the...
So,
They were handed out at the meeting.
yeah, okay.
These were...
That came from Mary Deal, directly to
Yep.
all of us.
But this is not part of the original record?
No, the packet that came in the mail was the rehearing request, but this picture was provided at the meeting. They were original.
That was actually the,
Okay, so I'm looking now what was presented.
Yep.
There are pictures of it
Right.
relative to the abutting the property and
So in
the
her
fence.
Yeah.
those are submitted by Mary Deal.
Yep.
And her pictures are really mostly of comparison vans to try
For
to
tonight's meeting, yes.
demonstrate that it's yeah.
Right.
Let's give that back to Craig since it's the original.
Does anyone want to make a motion?
Are we ready for a motion?
I'm not making one. Well, my point is, I'm, even though I had discussed the possibility of granting for that purpose, I'm not inclined to do that after discussing it.
I do regret that she doesn't feel, and I think, and I can see her perspective, that she really had an adequate chance to be heard. However, and if the applicant is not parking the van where he represented that, I do think she has every right to ask that that be enforced strictly. However, I don't really see anything new then. I don't think either of her 2 claims of misleading were misleading. I mean, maybe hopefully not, but maybe we made the wrong decision, but I don't think we have anything new to that would change it at this point.
So you want to make a motion?
So I'd move to deny the motion to rehear.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I'll take the opportunity for discussion. I appreciate the material that you've provided. Appreciate it the night that you did it. I appreciate this. I think the board can be clearer in its discussion. I think the board can be clearer in its approvals and exactly what we're approving. I think you've brought up some issues that I will follow up with the chair and perhaps staff about to clarify our procedures so that we're all on the same page of what is happening and should happen, maybe not just how things have been happening. I do wish we had put a condition on the approval, and I wish we had been clearer on the approval. So.
Any further discussion? Motion to deny is before us and seconded. All those in favor of denying signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? So Motion is to deny?
Yep.
So 3-1 with Ms. Scott in the negative. Negative?
Yeah, it's a double negative there.
Okay. To deny. Scott. Okay. Paperwork. Down your way.
Did we do anything else while I was gone? I'm sorry.
No, I
No,
just did
we
that.
recessed 2 of the hearings because they asked for.
Okay. The Irving Oil and the Concord Litho?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
All right, let's proceed with the public hearing now for case number 10-18. NAMI New Hampshire applicant wishes to add a new exit and porch on the north side of an existing building and request a variance to Article 28-4-1H, the table of dimensional regulations to permit a structure with not less than a 2-foot plus or minus setback, where a setback of 15 feet is required for property located at 85 North State Street in a CVP Civic Performance District. Would you step forward, please? And if you could take the first seat to my right or your left, no, over here.
I'm Steve Green.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, please state your name and where you live.
Steve Green, 4 Amoskeag Road, Concord, New Hampshire.
We just pass these on and then. Alrighty.
Steve, you're the contractor?
Yes, I'm the
representing-
contractor, Mr. Green Jeans Remodeling Service. Just to give you a little background, NAMI New Hampshire is an organization that's a nonprofit organization that offers support, education, and advocacy to families of folks who have mental issues. They purchased the building around 6 years ago. At that time, they did a large renovation. Their programs that they run expanded, and they had to do an addition a couple of years after that. And once again, their role has expanded in the community, and they're bringing on more programs and need more staff. So they purchased the building at 87 North State, which is on the right-hand side of the picture. The existing building is on the left-hand side of the picture. And what we want to do is provide a safe passage between the two buildings for the employees. So I don't know if you can rotate that so we can see the side of 85. Yep. See the two windows closest to the road on 85? Right there. That's where we want to build. We want to build a small porch, 4 foot deep and about 6 feet wide with a roof over it. It will allow them to cross their parking lot, which they will own that driveway, to the entrance that's on the same side of 87. Maybe you can rotate the picture that way. The issue we have is that 85, as many other buildings in that area, 85 is mostly in the setback. Setback runs through the building. You can see it on your map. It's probably 10 feet into the building. So there's, without a variance, there's really no way we can do anything on that side of the building to provide access to the new building. And as you can see, they would have to, if we don't have that, then they would have to go out the front steps, which unfortunately are granite, and down onto the sidewalk, and then back up the driveway and into the 87 building, which puts them in issues with snow removal, etc., slanted, slippery driveway in the wintertime, those sort of issues. So we feel it's best to have as much of the direct access between the two buildings as possible. And that's why we're asking for the ability to put that porch on the building.
So you would create a walkway to the building on the right?
Yeah.
Across that driveway?
Yeah, it would go connect between the two, so there'd be a porch on the left hand on the original building, some steps down, and then onto the grass. There'd be some sort of a walkway in the grass area to lead you to the pavement, which would allow you to then walk across the parking lot, across the driveway and up.
And then you've got to step up to get across that granite wall or whatever it is.
Well, the entrance, existing entrance is down where the brick and the white come together right in there.
So that's where you're going to.
You can't see it in that picture too well. Oh, I guess you can, actually. That's the entrance right there. So it's almost directly across.
So side door to side door.
Yeah, they'll be almost directly across from each other.
So it's just, so you're just gonna have, oh, the porch is gonna have to go within the setback.
Yes, because the building, that whole side of the building is within the setback.
So you're,
We'll still be within the property line.
yeah,
But we won't be with.
you're going a couple more feet out into the setback to do this.
Yeah, well, the porch will be 4 feet out and then a couple of steps down, so maybe it'll be 6 more feet into the setback, but still.
On the line.
The property line is someplace kind of on the edge of that grass.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the granite marker on the front. I'm not saying it's exactly there, but you have see that yellow line is a setback line. You can see it runs right through the building.
Well, that's the approximate property line, but even that's not 100% accurate on the GIS, so.
The plot plan we gave you was, there again, close, but I'm not saying it was perfect because we did not do a survey of the two buildings. There was a survey done of 85 when we did an earlier renovation, really earlier addition. Of 70 because we don't own it. They'll be taking possession there this month.
Are both buildings handicapped accessible now?
The original building is, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of the picture, the third roof back, actually, there's a handicapped entrance there with a lift that takes you up a story. Yeah, okay, see right about where you pointed to that green door. The garage is not there anymore. That actually is an addition. Not the green door, I'm sorry, the white door next to it. Just go into the right a little bit. That has become the handicapped. No, it's a green door. It's a green door. And there is an addition where the garage is. On the other side, on the new building, we will be putting in a handicap ramp that will lead up to that white entry porch. And there will be accessible bathroom within there. So both buildings will be totally accessible.
The new exit will not be handicapped accessible?
I'm sorry?
The new exit will not be handicapped accessible?
No. No. Because then we would need a ramp that would even more encroach into the setbacks and property lines. So I think that's it, unless anybody has any other questions.
Any other questions from members of the board? Right, thank you very much. Is there anyone who would like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Please step forward. Swear to tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and where you reside.
Scott Walker, 42 South Fruit Street in Concord. I represent the owners of 87 North State Street, Elizabeth Perkins Trust, and we wanted you to know that we have no issues with this request and hope that you grant it tonight.
Any questions of Mr. Walker? Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Good night.
Is there anyone else who would like to be heard in favor of this appeal? Is there anyone who would like to be in opposition to this appeal? I'll declare the hearing and open this up for discussion.
Property application where the notice said 2 feet, and so it would, and I believe I checked with Mr. Walker, it should be no less than a 2-foot setback, so that, because they said that they would be with an 8-foot setback where 15 is required, but the notice said 2, so I think it was a.
Yep.
Yes.
condition from another? I mean, there's a way to articulate it so that in the event NAMI sells one of the buildings in the future, they don't have to take the porch down if they gave the consent of the new.
That's fine. Once and it's there, the condition's been met. I mean,
I think they're saying your condition was if there is long.
The other property. How about that? So then it's not in the same ownership. They don't have to keep it, but they've purchased the other.
I guess at some point in the future, NAMI decides to sell one of the buildings to it, and so there would no longer be one owner. There'd be two owners. I think we'd want to, with the consent of the new owner, keep the porch there, keep the encroachment.
Anybody purchasing or if they were to sell the building separately, knowledge of that,
right,
in the setback, I think,
Maybe I didn't understand your condition.
If I change it that the variance is conditioned on them, I should say, purchasing the property at 87, thank you. They don't have to keep it forever, but they have to purchase it in order to meet the condition of the variance.
the variance cannot be exercised until both properties are held in common.
There you go.
That's fine.
Right, we're not saying in the future.
And the whole intent building for
Are you making the motion?
Sure. In order, how'd you eloquently say it? In order to exercise the variance?
Yeah, the variance may not be exercised until which time both buildings are held in common ownership.
Thank you. And that it's no less than a 2-foot setback.
Right, well, that's in the, yeah.
That's not in their application, that was in the notice. Craig caught that, so I just want to make sure if someone's looking at the application, it's clear what we're approving.
Sure.
Second, anyone?
Second.
Discussion?
Yeah, just before just matter of disclosure, my wife is on the board of NAMI New Hampshire, but I don't think that influences my ability to be fair in my consideration.
Okay, duly noted. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries 4-0. All right, the next case before us is case number 1318, 117 Manchester Street LLC. Applicant requests a modification of a variance granted under case 43-17, allowing the applicant to provide 122 parking spaces where 138 spaces were required to now be allowed to provide 122 spaces when 151 spaces are required for property at 117 Manchester Street in a CH Highway Commercial District. Do you both swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
As you testify, just state your name and where you reside.
Thank you. My name is Philip Hastings. I'm an attorney with Cleveland Waters and Bass. I represent Manchester Street LLC.
Manchester Street as
copies of additional material.
Yeah.
New stuff?
Yes, Phil, I didn't. Or did they get handed? Get handed out, okay. On the board is what you sent me.
Oh.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, is this different than what was in the hyperlink from the original?
Yes.
Oh, it's different, okay, okay.
It is slightly different. than
Okay,
what was in
all
the
right.
application. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as you may recall, I think at least 3 of you were sitting when we were here before you. Most recently in December, the applicant received a variance to permit 122 parking spaces where 138 were required under the ordinance. That variance application and calculation was based on proposed renovations to the building at 8 Old Suncoast Road, which would have fully converted what's shown as Building A on this site into 31 one-bedroom apartments. So it'd be the entirety of the first floor as well as the second floor. Since then, and somewhat unexpectedly, the applicant was able to find a commercial tenant for the entire first floor, which is what the site was planned for originally. It had sat vacant for many years. So this is a nice situation for my client to be in. Unfortunately, it's a little bit inconsistent with the variance that was granted. The tenant that hopefully will occupy the property in the springtime is Compass Innovative Behavior Strategies. They provide behavioral therapy to children age 10 and under with autism and other developmental delays. So it's classified as a healthcare practitioner's office. As a result of that, the required parking will now be 151 spaces based on just over 10,000 square feet of healthcare offices on the first floor instead of the 15 apartments that was in our previous application. In order to continue its plan to bring the site into compliance with the landscaping requirements in the zoning ordinance and the site plan regulations, and more broadly to improve the general appearance of the property, the applicant intends to reduce the parking consistent with the prior variance. In fact, we were able to create an additional space during the site design process. So the total proposed spaces would be 123 as opposed to 122 as previously approved. We also recently discovered some code compliance issues in the first floor of the building that requires the elimination of one of the residential units. So we're reducing the number of apartments upstairs from 16 to 15. That reduces the requirement to 149. So in sum, in December, you approved a variance for 122 spaces where 138 were required. We're now asking you to modify that variance to permit 123 spaces where 149 are required. So it's a slightly larger non-conforming situation that we're proposing. We don't believe that this increased nonconformity will have any practical effect whatsoever. In fact, we think that by using the first floor for its more intended commercial use, the demand for parking at any one time will actually be lessened. Before, if you had all residential uses, you'd be potentially taking up 62 spaces, probably at the same time. Here you've got non-concurrent uses. You've got the commercial use will be used on the first floor primarily during the day. Their business model is set up so it runs generally with the school year and the school calendar. Children are dropped off in the morning, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. They leave at the end of the day for 5 o'clock after they've received their services.
What type of, what do they do?
They provide behavioral therapy. So it's mostly one-on-one services are being provided. They anticipate having about 20 employees, so using about 20 spots during those daytime hours only. So you have a situation where the highest utilization of the residences will be at night, the highest utilization of the ground floor will be in the daytime. Failure to grant this request, we don't believe is in the city's interest and would be contrary to the spirit and intent of the ordinance. As we stated in December, because of the existing conditions of the site, the applicant can't fully comply with both the parking requirements and the landscaping requirements. We had this discussion with you that it was sort of a trade-off of what we feel is and what the board feels is most worthwhile. It strikes us that it's better to make the property fully comply with the landscaping requirements than the parking requirements, particularly when the actual parking needs will be adequately met with the reduced number of parking spaces. The alternative for the applicant is to essentially leave the site in its present condition. We could forego creating the residential units on the top floor. The site is grandfathered from the landscaping requirements. There's parking on site now that would meet all those requirements. But that certainly is not the highest and best use of this property. It would perpetuate really suboptimal appearance of the building and the site and the functionality of the site. So we think granting the variance, even though it is slightly more non-compliant than our previous request, still is in the best interest of the city and this project and will make a dramatic improvement to the area.
Was it, you guys have been in front of us a few times now, but
Yes.
wasn't one of the times that you swore you could not get a commercial renter in this spot? Like,
That's
you've
usually
been
how it
trying
works,
for years.
just when you get your approval.
Yeah, are we like good luck or what?
Well, it's a good question.
You've been trying for like decades or something.
Craig's playing Megabucks tonight. What are we doing? Powerball? We're going Craig together. Okay. That's good. So I was approached maybe a month after we came through the first time. So we were going through this process, 16 apartments on the second floor, 15 on the first. And it happened to be that this particular company has a facility down in Nashua, but they also have another facility in Bow. And they have about 7,000 square feet in Bow. They've outgrown that space. This is a better location for them. The only reason they knew about it, one of the partners actually used to go to school at Granite State College in this building. And just happened to be doing some business in Pembroke, saw it, and we hadn't been approached in 6 months by anybody. Nobody had even looked at it. The building had been vacant prior to our purchase for at least 4 years after Granite State College moved out. So we're almost at 6 years at this point with it being vacant.
And trying to market it for most of the time until you gave up and came up with this plan. So.
We were at it for 14 to 16 months, and there were some people looking, but nobody that was serious enough to do it, and there would have been major modifications, and it just nothing worked out. And they wouldn't have been the highest and best use too. So we offered it to anybody, and this just came out of the blue. We actually had already pulled a demo permit for the second floor and the first floor from the city, and my demo guy was coming in for the first floor, and I told him to hold off like 2 weeks before. So I should play Powerball tonight because it would have been gone. And I held him off. I said, give me till after Christmas, we'll wait. So I think this is a great client. They want to be in town. They're good people. It's a good cause for the kids, and you know they've been doing this for a while. So it's not an idea or a startup. They know what they're doing. Good mixed use for that particular use because their drop-offs are somewhere around 8 a.m. The parents leave, the kids are there, it's one-on-one therapy. They do have an after-school program, so there'll be pickups at like 3 o'clock. So between 3 and 4, we'll pick up a little bit. And then I think it goes to like 6:30 at night some nights where they'll have an after-school program too. So from the residential and the commercial, the residential will be there. We'll have specific parking, and we'll work something out where we figure out where the best spots are. We also have tenants at 117 Manchester Street that use some of the parking in between, so we're gonna lose some of the parking spots on the, I guess it would be considered the south end. We lose 4 or 5 parking spots up against the building because we're gonna be creating a patio and certain parts of what the city wanted for that particular building, where the 15 apartments will use some private space, landscaped area. So we're spending the money in the right spots there, but we are losing parking. That's why we're back in front of you today.
You're actually keeping parking the same, but you have a greater requirement, right?
Right, that's correct.
Well, they're also adding the landscaping too, which eliminated some of the, because originally this lot had no interior landscaping. It was just wide open piece of pavement. So with the change of use, they're now bringing it up to grade with the landscaping requirements.
So if you walked on this property now, you probably could count out somewhere around 154 parking spots. But for us to get up to our 5%, which we ended up coming up with somewhere around 5.1% for the landscape requirement, we lost all those additional parking spots.
Any questions of either Mr. Hastings or Mr. Sullivan from the board? Is there anything else you'd like us to know?
I don't believe so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who wants to be heard in favor of the application? Anyone wants to be heard against the application? Greg?
I can answer questions if you have any more.
Members of the board? Questions of Greg?
Does it have to go to planning?
Yes, it will be going to planning. In fact, I believe they worked in conjunction with planning to put this landscaping plan together. So they're having multiple conversations.
Great.
Okay, with that, I'll declare the hearing closed and open it up for discussion.
I didn't sit on this case when it came to the board in December, but I do think it's a better use to have a non-residential use on the first floor. And like I said, that's usually how it works when you've decided to move on to something else. That's when the tenant shows up. But I do, even though it's still not meeting the parking requirements, just doing back of the envelope calculations, if you have 20 employees and 20 clients, even if the parents stay, okay, that's 40 spots. They might have 5 administrators, so that's 45 parking. And then if you have 31 units, and even if they all had 2 cars and they were all on the site at the same time, that's 107 spots. And you're providing 123. So even if, and there's, again, there's still spots for visitors and everybody else. So again, I think I'm a big fan of less parking. I think we plan for, like, assuming everyone's home at the same time and every square footage of every building, which is rarely ever the case. So I think even with 123 parking spots that you're proposing to provide, and you need 149, the site's more than adequate for that. And again, I'm a big believer, especially in the market. If people can't find a parking space, or your tenants on the commercial side have complaints about their customers, they'll move somewhere else. They won't be there if they need more parking. So I have no problem with this.
And I noticed in the December minutes, Andrew made a similar observation about the.
I did.
Yeah, you did. About the parking.
Which his math is accurate?
Well, they kind of echo, I think it was at the Planet Fitness case, and Chris had said something like, I mean, the purpose of the ordinance, the parking ordinance, is if it was going to put parking onto the street and therefore interfere with other businesses parking, but when it's, the only people it could hurt is themselves if their parking issue, and you got to figure he knows his own business. He's not going to make his, have so much parking that it interferes with his tenants or his business. So there's no, it doesn't hurt anyone else.
So we're ready for a motion?
I'll make a motion to grant the variance to allow 123 spaces where 149 are required.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
We'll be back.
We'll save all our material.
It doesn't have to be neat.
I'm keeping my plans.
And finally, the last case tonight is case number 14-18. Dan DePiro, applicant wishes to develop a property within the FEMA 100-year Kentucky River floodplain for a single-family detached dwelling, use A-1, and request variances to 1. Article 2832D2, use prohibited in the 100-year floodplains in the F1 district, Section A, to permit the construction of a dwelling unit or building designated for residential purposes where such a use is not permitted. 2, Article 2832D2, use prohibited in the 100-year floodplains in the F1 district, Section D, to install a well which is intended as a source of potable water. And 3, Article 2832F2 and 3, to permit a building to be constructed in a 100-year floodplain without being served by municipal water and sewer, all for property located at 92 Reynolds Road in an RO residential open space district. Do you both swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay. State your names and where you reside for the record, please.
Dan DePiro. I reside at 41 Oriole Drive in Bedford, New Hampshire. Bob?
Yes, Robert Irving, 543 West Salisbury Road in Salisbury, New Hampshire.
Great. Tell us what you want to do.
All right, so I am the new owner, relatively new owner of the lot at 92 Runnels, which is in a 100-year FEMA floodplain. And the previous owner put all of the permissions and so forth in place and received these variances from the town, and I'm not sure when it was. I did my best to, before buying the lot, to educate myself about all the permits and variances and so forth, but slipped up, and we were under the impression we had until January of 2019 to do our building. And so we got planning and we tried to pull building permits. In early February, we found out that variances had expired weeks earlier in January of 2018. So we're here to ask you to reinstate those variances.
When were they granted originally? Do you know?
I apologize, I don't have.
January 6, 2016.
So they last 2 years.
Were these granted to you originally?
No.
The previous owner?
Yes, the previous owner, and I'm blanking on his name, although we've got it somewhere. Yeah. And what we're, the previous, sorry?
Roy Philbrick?
Yes, Roy Philbrick. And he did this with the help of an environmental engineer, Michael Lambert, and they invested a great deal of time and so forth and drew up the drawings before you. We're just representing, I'm no expert on this stuff, but we're just representing what Roy Philbrick and Mike Lambert presented to the board months ago, or maybe a year or more ago. So I don't bring great expertise to this presentation.
Craig, do you have the minutes for that?
Let's see.
Or any action of how we approved it or what we did?
May I ask a question of the applicant?
Yeah.
So is the variance you're proposing the exact same as what was approved in 2016?
Yes, right down to the language of the application.
Well, yeah, I did notice
directly from their application.
I did notice that. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
In your application, you said that all approvals from the planning board and DES were granted. Is that accurate? Do the approvals from DES still go? Are they still good for septic and well? And the conditional use permit from the planning board is still good?
Yes.
Okay.
And we went to the DES. We needed to elaborate. So the original lot owner's drawings specified a house that was not quite what we decided we wanted to build. So we needed to show a different footprint. The original application also didn't show no porches, no stairs, actually no way to get into the house. So we made some changes and presented that to the DES, and they okayed it.
And you have, because again, I noticed on your plans that you submitted, you have, it was hard to read, but yeah, I saw a DES stamp for subsurface. Okay.
Yep.
All right, I just wanted to make sure that was valid and not a previous one.
We met with somebody at DES and talked about various things, and then we confirmed later that what we were doing passed. There were some issues in the on the plans that were a little unclear. We talked to them. They said we had, I think the variance from DES is a 5-year, and it goes through 2021. Okay. And he said we were well within compliance for everything. We spent quite a bit of time trying to make sure. There were a lot of factors going on here.
Right.
And we were trying to get everything ready to get it in, and there was a misunderstanding somehow about when the variances expired, and we were so there was a variance, there was a state variance, and there were, I guess, 2 from the city. I'm not sure. There was a lot going on with this lot. Yep. And we were trying to get everything in under the deadline so there wouldn't be any issues.
So it looks like, actually, I'm looking at the minutes, I actually voted against it at the time. It was 3-2. There was 2 people in opposition at that time, a Lloyd Noble and a Steve Dominici. Have you heard anything from them?
Sorry?
2 people, I think they were probably neighbors, or they both lived on Runnels Road.
Yes, Dominici owns a lot of property on the end of Runnels Road. Yes.
Lloyd Noble, back in 2016, they came and spoke against the variance, and it passed, but it nevertheless passed 3-2.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what were the names again?
They were Lloyd Noble and Steve Dominici.
What was the
Steve
case
Dominici is in a butter and received a copy of that.
Right.
They're at Runnels Road. I don't know if they're butters or they just heard about it.
What was the case number?
It was...
Yeah, I'm having problems accessing the minutes here, so I can get them downstairs if you need them.
It's 50-15.
50?
Yeah, 50-15.
And the date?
Well, it was decided on January 6th, 2016. These are just the draft minutes that Rose had sent at the time, but
I looked
assumed they were
online, I couldn't
approved.
access
Yeah,
it.
it was weird. Yeah.
It only
Unfortunately,
goes back to like April of 2016, and then there's nothing.
I've got them right here.
You do, okay.
Wow.
2 years.
Yeah. And I can't get through the, onto the shared drive to get them either. They're not connected, so. Yeah, the Dominicis live next door. This is the subject lot here. Dominicis own this property and these properties over here.
Okay, so they were notified, they're still
Yeah.
owners. Sometimes, since it's been a long time, they may have sold and the new owners may not care, but they were notified of this hearing and your request, so.
Is the city in a butter as well, is it?
Yeah, we I believe have the land over here. It's a recreation, Gus Litton.
Trail system.
Yeah.
Conservation land.
But Mr. Noble at 52, he's not in a butter, is
No, he would have been outside of the 300.
Thank you.
Well, we're only required by law to send certified to direct putters, but we do a 300-foot radius. But Noble would be farther up the street
Okay.
in that location.
I'm trying to get oriented where in the river this is.
It's not far from Daisy Beach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this would be Broad Cove
Yeah, okay.
Lane here. This is down at the very end of Runnels Road, so.
How high up the bank? The bank is 6-8 feet.
Yeah, I'd say 8, 10-ish. Yeah, maybe 8. I'd say 8. And our plan is to build an elevated home, open foundation, 2 feet above the FEMA mark of 357 feet. Did my darnest to do all my homework around this before I bought the lot and to continue it after I bought the lot. There was a misunderstanding, and actually a town rep assured me, someone from the planning office assured me in writing that the soonest deadline we had to worry about was January of 2019. So we sort of relaxed our our investigation into the lot. We figured everything was in place, and we went to work planning the home. And as I say, it wasn't until we tried to pull building permits that we discovered that it had expired. And then the zoning office told us different. Told us the reality that these had expired.
Someone had come a couple of years ago. There's a thing where they said that they had been told by the city, and there's some. Laura seems pretty confident that that's not a basis. Is that a basis for
granting a variance? No.
Or no?
No, it's an unfortunate situation, but
there's some. Maybe it's something else. Something where the city sits on its rights.
Well,
it was that dog case.
Yeah.
There's municipal estoppel.
Yeah.
If somebody, there's 2 of them. And one is if somebody has acted directly on certain information given by an administrative official, then yeah, I think we're stopped. Is that the right word, Laura?
Estoppel.
Estoppel, yeah. The other one is
laches.
Yep.
Yes. Thank you.
Lawyer.
So,
yeah, it is unfortunate that you were provided incorrect information. I'm sure it was an oversight, and planning and zoning have different deadlines of how long things last, which one day maybe the state will put on the same cycle, but the variances are good for a year. Oh, 2 years here? Okay, so 2 years, and planning boards are usually longer, but it is unfortunate. I do have a question though, because I want to just make sure. I thought I saw in the application that no fill was being brought in. Did I read that correctly?
That I don't know.
Okay.
Do you, Bob?
I don't. Well, we're not adding any fill to the site.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
In fact, we have to. Actually, the structural engineer that designed the foundation said we have to take out a little bit of fill so that the grade is the same on both sides of the wall, the standard wall. And like I said, until we were told that we had, till I think it was June, by an official, we were all set to get in there in time. And what we were looking for was just a short extension to get complete the permit. The permit process is complete except for the zoning.
But I think what I'm understanding is we can't really take that into account. We have to consider this on the merits, and the purpose of the floodplain district is to essentially minimize the risk of flood, which would be obviously a burden on you or your property, but also on the city or the public at large for having to devote resources if there was a catastrophe. Can you speak at all to why that wouldn't apply in this particular lot?
Just with my limited familiarity of the evidence that the engineer put forth, I think what he was saying was there were floods in the past, and this area didn't flood, and posed no danger to the existing structures neighboring this lot, and that ours will be built. It's going to be higher. It's going to be elevated. The foundation's completely open, much like a home on piers, near the shore. So it'll pose less of a risk in that sense.
You made reference to your DS permits. I don't know if you have an inventory or not, but if you could just let us know what they are and to what degree are they guided by the FEMA 100-year flood zone?
Do you have a copy of that? I apologize for not being
I might.
better prepared.
You don't, give me a flavor for what it is.
They would have a subsurface for their
Right.
septic system as well as a well that would have to meet DES's requirements because it's in a floodplain.
Is there an alteration of terrain from it?
No, I
No,
don't
not
believe we would
this,
have enough
no.
land area to require that.
It's too small.
Yeah,
Just putting in the driveway, and then the issue that we went back to ask about and to get, to alter the application, to alter the permission from them, was square footage, impermeable square footage. So we were adding a covered porch and a deck, and we had a slightly different size house. It was actually, the house footprint was smaller, but we were ending up with a slightly more square feet of impermeable area. But we were still, I think it's a 20% of the total lot area, or the total buildable area that you can use, that you can fill with impermeable structures. And we were still very low. I think we were 7%.
Yeah, 10% would be the maximum lot coverage in an RO, so as long as you're below that, yeah.
Yeah, so there was no.
Is there a grade on the lot, or is it flat?
Sorry,
Is there a grade on the lot?
the pitch of the lot, yeah, it's not dramatic. It's, and we have drawings.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, these are the contours here. These are 2-foot contours, so this is at the 350, I believe it is, and that's 352. So it actually kind of comes up from the river, crests, and then drops back down a little bit towards the rear of the property. In fact, I think there's some additional wetlands.
The rear of the property is where there's a bunch of wetlands as well. So.
Where's the septic going to be?
Front and off to the right, so east.
I have the Department of Environmental Services shoreline permit here, and I have the DES approval for construction for the septic here. So we have both of those. Both of those are current, and
they were issued a couple of years ago when?
The approval was issued 12/5/2016, and the shoreline permit was approved November 28th, 2016, expires November 28th, 2021.
Was that our new one?
This one. Yeah, there weren't any.
Okay.
Any official changes to this.
Are they the same plans as back in 2016, or?
The same shoreline protection plans, yes. We have not altered them.
Yeah,
We
so
did.
we're putting the house on the same spot.
But
the house is slightly different. And we have drawings, if you'd like to see that.
Yeah, I think the plans that they have today are more complete than what was presented to the board originally. I don't think you had all the details last time they came.
Yeah.
Mr. Filbert came to the board.
It was originally an L-shaped house, and now it's a rectangular house.
Any further questions of Mr. DePiero or Mr. Irving from the board? Let the record show that there's no one else in the audience, so I assume there's no one who's going to speak in favor or against the appeal. Craig.
Again, variance, once it's granted, is good for a period of 2 years. Our ordinance does allow a request for a 1-year extension prior to the expiration of that 2-year period. And then, I will concur, unfortunately, there was some miscommunication between the city staff and Mr. DePiero.
Can you confirm that there's no mechanism you're aware of for us to remedy that?
Again, you need to look at the merits of the application that's before you.
We have to look on it as if it's a brand new application.
Yeah. With a small hedge on there, though, stating that you know, where it has been granted before and there's no significant material change in the circumstances surrounding the case, you would probably need to identify what has changed. Yeah.
So you voted against it last time, so.
Yeah, so nothing may have changed for
yeah.
you.
And again, this app, and I can understand your point from the previous application. This is a hard one for me. I wasn't on the board when the prior owner was here. I'm not a big fan of building in floodplains. There's a reason that there's a floodplain ordinance. The thing that I will likely vote to grant this only because it was granted prior, you haven't changed anything, and you have all your other permits in place that were put in place when the last variance was there. That you went to the planning board, you went to DES, and you got all those approvals. The only thing that didn't happen was a building permit being pulled. Nothing else has changed. You weren't changing the plans, you didn't increase the footprint, you didn't do any of that stuff that brought you back here. It simply was a timing issue. I have a hard time denying something because of miscommunication and timing when it was that close. And you weren't the original owner. If you were the original owner, I might have a different answer for you of keeping track of that. And again, I wasn't here voting on this the first time. I may have had a different answer. Though I do feel if this was to be granted, a condition would be that making sure that in the ZBA file, the copies of the DES permits are there as well as the original planning board approval, so that is part of the ZBA record for this case. That Craig get those, that you provide that information, that's there, and that what gets, obviously I'm sure the building permit, but that it all matches up, so that there isn't another accidental slip up that something that had been approved previously doesn't carry forward for whatever reason.
Any other questions of Craig?
No.
So with that, I'll declare the hearing closed and open it up for discussion.
Sorry. I jumped the gun.
That's okay.
I apologize.
It's okay.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Andrew?
Well, I agree with everything that Laura said, but I mean, from what I'm hearing, that's not valid criteria, and I voted against it back then, so what's that expression? The consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds with a line. I feel I don't see any compelling grounds, and I wish I did, because everything you said I agree with, and I do think that that they got bad information and that they relied upon. But if that's not truly a legitimate factor under the code, then I have to rule on the merits, and I think I have to rule the same as I did before, because I don't think the floodplain code the purpose of the code is that residential construction should not be built in floodplains. You two guys voted in favor of it at the time.
Jim? Comment?
According to the minute.
Yeah, I don't disagree that there's a reason that there's restrictions on the building in the floodplain, but there's also the ability of the zoning board to grant the variance, and so I'm going to take advantage of that. I think that the applicant is in an interesting position because of the expectations both from previously built and from what the city had to say. I also agree the fact that including in the record the permits from DES will demonstrate that we've given some pause to making sure that this is built environmentally in a more appropriate manner, and it is not this part of the river and this part of town. There's a lot of structures in the floodplain, so I'd be happy to make the motion to approve, and we'll do so with the condition that the DES documentation be included in the record, and give the applicant, I'm sure, will get that to the city soon. Well, certainly before they pull the permits.
Yeah.
Right?
Generally, a lot of that information is included as part of the permit package. So.
Right. But I think Laura's suggestion was, in addition to the permit packet, that it also be included in a ZBA record.
Right, they're all kept in the same file, so.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all together.
I will second that with a friendly amendment that the copy of the planning board, because I think they have to get a conditional use permit as well. Just make sure that
Yeah.
that's in our case file, just so that it's acknowledged that that happened with the original variance and that they didn't wait on that.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition?
Nay.
Nay. With Andrew in the minority, motion passes. Great. Approval of last month's minutes.
I wasn't here, so I don't want to make them.
I'm gonna be honest, I didn't read them. I'm sorry. They got lost in my shuffle.
So you just want to wait?
Can we postpone them? Yes, because I wouldn't be, I don't feel appropriate to vote on something I didn't read. I'm sorry. I'm sure they're beautiful, but.
And if we had a motion from Andrew, there's nobody to second, so. So we'll postpone it.
I might have.
Postpone.
Sorry.
Rose will remind us that we need.
I will read them diligently before
Tonight.
the next meeting. No, probably not tonight. So.
Yeah, right.
Right, Rosa, is there any other business for us?
No, nothing I can think of.
Okay, well,
How are you doing?
adjourned. There.